Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
Development concerning the safety of Sean Diddy Combs inside the federal prison system. The former music icon, now inmate Combs, is reportedly the victim of a brutal ambush, and the situation is evolving rapidly into a full-scale crisis.
Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. The circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what, we did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations, that's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual...
The fear filtering out from behind the walls of his correctional facility is stark, desperate, and terrifying. New reports claim he might not make it out alive. Diddy's legal team fought relentlessly to get him out of the notorious Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a place they rightly called hell on earth, where he was previously threatened and reportedly survived a severe confrontation. They succeeded in getting him transferred to the lower security federal correctional institution at Fort Dix, New Jersey, a move intended to save his life. but according to whispers and high-level, unverified internal reports, that transfer was tragically too late. The target on his back was too bright, too visible, and the threat followed him. The report suggests Diddy was ambushed in an attack involving multiple inmates. This was not a random altercation. This was a calculated, devastating assault. The reasons are always the same: his fame, his fortune, and the deeply despised nature of the Mann Act convictions he received, crimes involving transportation for prostitution, that place him at the very bottom of the prison hierarchy. He is a trophy, a mark, a symbol of the world the inmates resent. Sources close to the system are using
When Jane and Combs watched pornography together, Jane testified that she contacted 2 different porn stars and invited them to join her and Mr. Combs. Both Ms. Ventura and Jane testified that very often they would see the same men over and over again for years. In July of 2024, Jane testified, for instance, that she suggested to Mr. Combs that they call Paul. Jane explained that she told Combs she, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, "Because I did." This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were: serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, 2 of the 3 locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs,
language to describe the scene discovered by correctional officers, a massive, life-threatening injury sustained during the sudden ambush. The details are too graphic to share, but the result is a critical, destabilizing fear among the staff trying to contain the violence and, more urgently, trying to save his life. Think about the implications of the phrase, he might not make it out alive. This is the fear of prison staff who are already operating under intense scrutiny and understaffing. If a figure of Diddy's international magnitude were to die in federal custody, It would trigger a crisis of governance, a storm of investigations, lawsuits, and public outcry that would lay bare every systemic failure within the Bureau of Prisons. Every official, from the guards on the floor to the federal leaders in Washington, D.C., is now bracing for the unthinkable. While we must emphasize that official confirmation of this critical health status is being fiercely withheld by the Bureau of Prisons, as is standard practice for high-profile inmates for security reasons,
here is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency sweep that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility, such that Mr. Combs' safety.
The sheer velocity and panic of the reports are undeniable. His family and former associates are reportedly locked out, agonizingly awaiting any word, unable to secure the external, high-level medical care they would have previously been able to command. We have a terrifying, escalating situation inside the federal correctional system. This is a breaking, unconfirmed but escalating report that strikes at the core of power, celebrity, and the brutal reality of prison life. Sean Diddy Combs, the man who once commanded a music empire, is reportedly the victim of a calculated, Violent ambush behind bars. The internal communications, the whispers from sources close to the facility, all point to a single, chilling truth: new reports claim he might not make it out alive. The danger was always there. It has always been there, from the moment the conviction for prostitution-related charges came down, turning the hip-hop mogul into federal inmate #37452-054. His life has been a countdown.
He is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too. Home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen, this new bail package would be presented.
We watched as his legal team fought tooth and nail, successfully petitioning to move him from the chaotic, violent hell on earth that was the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn to the theoretically safer, low-security environment of Fort Dix, New Jersey. The move was supposed to be his lifeline, his chance to serve his time away from the constant, deadly pressure. But the pressure found him. According to these highly sensitive, though currently unverified, internal reports, the attack on Diddy was a swift, brutal, and highly coordinated ambush. This wasn't a spontaneous yard fight. This was a plan, executed with lethal intent. The nature of his conviction, transportation for prostitution, branded him within the prison ecosystem. In the unforgiving hierarchy of incarceration, this is a crime that guarantees hostility. That makes a man a magnet for the worst kind of violence. He became the ultimate target, and his immense fame only magnified the danger, turning him into an irresistible prize for anyone looking to make a name for themselves through blood. The scene that followed the
To be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR? So that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person. But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused, or, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things, and there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way.
Mhm.
The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that, you know what, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen. But it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in
Yeah.
the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look,
ambush is what has sent shockwaves through the Bureau of Prisons. Reports indicate that Diddy was found in critical condition, having sustained massive trauma and severe, life-threatening injuries. He was reportedly discovered either unconscious or severely incapacitated, leading to an immediate, maximum-level emergency response. We are hearing reports of a full-scale institutional lockdown, of outside medical personnel being rushed to the scene, a highly irregular and alarming procedure that confirms the devastating gravity of the situation. The language being used by people on the inside is raw, it is desperate, and it is fear-driven. The core concern, the statement being whispered from one alarmed official to the next, is that the injuries are catastrophic and that despite all efforts, he might not make it out alive. This is the reality when a high-profile figure transitions from a luxury mansion to a steel and concrete cell. His status goes from protection to predation. The gravity of this situation cannot be overstated. Should Diddy die in custody, it would not just be
Look how far he has fallen. Now, at the same time, you have that going on. And so people can look, if you really look at the case, and not just the legal case, but the case in the court of public opinion. And victims, if you will, won. Because he has, not only did he have a criminal case he had to deal with, but he has what, upwards of 20, 30 civil cases
I think
that
even
he's
more than
also going to have
that.
to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each one of those cases, even if it's not proved by the victim that it happened, he is still going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees for each and every single case, and maybe millions for the more serious and those that get further down the line. So he's not done paying for his transgressions. And I think that for other people who are in similarly situated positions of power and influence, they certainly took notes from the Diddy trial and figured out, hey, if I continue to act like a pig,
Yeah.
pigs get slaughtered.
Yes, they do. And I just remember even in the outcome of the Sean Combs lawsuits that were filed, even probably before he was indicted, we were hearing and seeing more civil suits filed against other people. And even after this
Yes.
case, we've seen more high-profile figures have complaints against them, like Tyler Perry and Shannon Sharp and Smokey Robinson, all of which have denied the allegations against them. But I do think that a lot more people are willing to come forward, even if they're anonymous or even if they're willing to put their name out there too. But I'm curious, Adante, if you had a crystal ball, what are you expecting out of Diddy's October sentencing? Do you think it'll be kind of in the high max range or possibly on the lower end? I believe federal prosecutors are only asking for 4 years. The defense wants half of that, 2 years, possibly with a year of time served. So he could possibly be out next year around this time. But what are you expecting out of the sentencing?
Yeah, I don't see the judge giving him 4 or 5 years. If the prosecution asks for that time. So now that's kind of like the judge to go beyond that would have to find something that was aggravating in his mind to say, look, I'm going to give you more time than what the prosecution is even asking for. That doesn't happen, but it does happen at times. And it's pretty rare, but it's certainly something that's on the table. I just don't see that happening here. Instead, the judge could come down with a sentence, 2 years, 3 years. Diddy, by the time he shows up in court for sentencing, will have a year and a month in custody.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to get credit for that time. The judge could give him 3 years. That means he has about 2 years or so left. And then he could send him to a halfway house for a year and a day, and Diddy would be out with credit time served. So, I think Diddy doing the domestic violence program, doing the drug abuse programs, those are all ways in which to reduce the ceiling, his maximum exposure that he might otherwise be looking at if the judge were to say, hey, you know what? I agree with the prosecutors. Let's give him 4 years. Well, if he's doing the programs and he's already got a year and a month in time by the time you come to sentencing, his exposure is going to be significantly reduced. I believe, truly,
Mm-hmm.
unless the judge goes off the reservation and there's some type of motivation for the judge to really stick him with a long sentence, you're going to see Diddy bopping out of that courtroom
Oh,
and
absolutely.
a free man.
Yeah, absolutely. Like immediately. I honestly thought that was going to happen at the bond hearing. I really thought that was
a tragic end to a complicated, controversial life. It would be a federal scandal of epic proportions. It would force investigations into the security protocols, the staffing shortages, and the internal corruption that allows such high-stakes violence to occur in a facility supposedly chosen for its safety. The Bureau of Prisons is now facing a catastrophic, system-defining moment. Diddy, the man who once controlled millions, who was used to an army of security guards and private doctors, is now relying on the stretched, often inadequate resources of the federal government to keep him breathing. His family, already reeling from the conviction and sentencing, is now trapped in an agonizing state of limbo, completely shut off from a man fighting for his life in a hostile environment. They cannot reach him. They cannot confirm his condition. They can only wait for the next terrifying report. His wealth is useless. His power is gone. His only remaining leverage is the enormous scrutiny that now hangs over the prison walls. But scrutiny does not stop a blade or a blow. We are watching this story minute by minute. We will bring you any official confirmation on his health status, any sign of transfer to an external hospital, or any statement from his representatives. But right now, the silence from the Bureau of Prisons is deafening, and the reports we are receiving paint a terrifying picture of a man ambushed, broken, and clinging to life in the most dangerous place on earth. The man who once controlled the music industry, who defined a generation of culture with his audacious power, is now utterly powerless. His survival depends on the minimal resources and overwhelmed medical personnel of the very system he tried desperately to escape. His fortune means nothing. His fame means everything, as a target. This is the grim, ultimate price of his convictions. The legal system demanded 4 years and 2 months of his freedom, but the prison system demanded a far greater, potentially fatal toll. We continue to monitor the situation moment by moment, watching for any official statement, any sign of transfer, anything that confirms his status. The world is holding its breath as the ultimate fate of Sean Diddy Combs hangs by a thread behind bars. This is a story of power, celebrity, and the brutal reality of a system that takes no prisoners, even when they were once kings.